This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
I'm really delighted that today I've got the opportunity to talk to Professor Dawn Freshwater, the Vice-Chancellor of Auckland University, New Zealand's oldest and highest ranked university. Now, Dawn, you've got an extraordinary story about how you came to be where you are, but I also asked you to bring an object that represents your own personal journey as a leader and a learner. So would you like to share that with us, and then we can start our conversation?
So I've brought my, this is my punamu, and I have the punamu is something that I wear every day. It's something that was gifted to me when I arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it combines two of New Zealand's most symbolic artifacts, really. So it combines the kuru, which is the unfurling of the fern, and you know that New Zealand is very well known for the silver fern, but also for its wonderful ferns. The unfurling of the fern, which symbolizes new life, strength, and somewhat encapsulates this whole circle of life that we're in, you know, which is constant change, constant fluctuation, but that there is some sort of faith in that there will always be new life unfurling. And it combines with it the other symbol, which is really also something that's very dearly held in Māori culture, which is the fishhook. And the fishhook is another symbol of, you know, and again, sort of very, not necessarily, there are myths around the kuru and the fishhook, but a symbol of again, strength, prosperity. But there's something quite important about this, because the fishhook is also a symbol of safe travels over water. And I arrived in New Zealand not really knowing what to expect 5 years ago, and knowing that it was going to be an adventure, and knowing that it was going to be new and that something would unfurl, but I wasn't quite sure what it would be. And traveling over water is somewhat symbolic in terms of, you know, I came from the UK, I landed on the shores of Australia, and then landed on the shores of Aotearoa, New Zealand when I arrived into Auckland. And, you know, for me, it encapsulates something about the symbolic nature of life at the same time as being concrete. So I'm somebody who has always held as a professor of mental health and someone who came through the health system and the health service when I was very young. I've always held that sort of tension between life and death very much in, you know, in my vision. I dealt with a lot of life and death when I was very young. And I've always felt that there's a, you know, something quite precious about each moment that we have. And my intention has always been to live life fully symbolically and concretely. So, you know, in the sense of both being grounded and actually making a difference at a pragmatic level, but at the same time, really holding lightly the sort of nature of, you know, what it is to be human and what it is to be here. And this, while that sounds very philosophical, this is a very good reminder of me every day of, you know, where should I pay my attention today? What's new that's unfurling today? What's novel? Because every day has something novel. And I think even if it's when you walk to work, there's always something new to see and familiar surroundings. And what's my intention today? What is it that I can impact, even, in a very slight way, transform today just through my interaction with it. And that's what this means to me. So it's quite important, because at the end of the day, the pragmatic outcome that it brings me each day is, where is my attention? What's new and what's novel, and what can I actually intentionally have an impact on, a positive impact on today? Could just be stopping down the corridor and saying something to somebody that makes a difference.
So that's a wonderful expression of what drives you, what sustains you, and what keeps you going. And how fortunate it is that you've got a physical object to remind you every day. Where did you have that sort of perspective before you came to New Zealand, or it was something that New Zealand triggered in you?
No, I think so wherever I've been, I've always had that sense of being quite small in the world, at the same time as being able to really influence the world. Those two things are, for me, they're quite synonymous. So, when I was working in healthcare in the NHS, I would spend time with, lots of people who were struggling with their lives for whatever reason, whether that would be through psychological or mental health problems, or whether it was through working in prisons and people finding themselves in difficult situations, or whether it was through people's struggles with life and death. And I'm really being able to understand that, small things make a difference. You can have an impact, and recognizing that actually we're quite small also. So really keeping ourselves grounded in terms of that impact, but that doesn't mean that it isn't important. So I used to do all sorts of things. I've always carried a stone with me. I always carry things with me, and they are physical, concrete reminders, even though they might feel like inanimate objects. It's what we imbue in them, isn't it? It's what we project onto them, and it's a good reminder as a leader, because we're an object for many of our staff and our students and for society, and we carry the projections of society, and we carry the projections of our students and our staff, for good and bad.
So what you haven't mentioned, and I know, having read a bit about you beforehand, is you're a long distance runner. And how does that sort of endurance, resilience, focus connect with what you're talking about in terms of your own connection with your field of practice, but with also your discipline?
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Thinking about, I used to be able to do much more running than I do now, but being able to think about this symbolic, this is the connection, this symbolic nature of endurance, and thinking about how to pace oneself, discipline oneself, and actually not know what you're capable of until you try it. And to be able to understand where your limits are, and to know where to ask for help, and to know where maybe to slow down. All of the metaphors that can be used symbolically to understand what it's like to be a long distance runner work really nicely in the context of leadership, of setting a 10-year vision for an institution, of thinking about undertaking a PhD when you're working full time, which I did, of thinking about what's realistic right now, and reminding myself, as I often did when I was, really training for marathons and things like that, that it doesn't, that all the discipline and all the training is important, but it's also how you show up with the attitude. And I think, symbolically for me, all of those physical characteristics that it takes to bring a marathon to conclusion, or even the training to conclusion, and getting up and running in the rain at 5 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter, You know, that all of those things feel at the time like small individual things that are quite separate, but holding them together in the overall narrative, the overall story, is actually, I think, quite important in terms of giving meaning.
Mhm.
So this is for me how I ascribe meaning to life, and it's also how I ascribe meaning to my work, and it's also how I think about other people bring meaning to their life and to their work and to their environment.
When you look at your career as a leader and a learner, starting in the UK, in the north of England, in nursing, coming to West Australia, conservative Australian university that has a history of privilege, then going to Auckland, also a large conservative privileged university. What are the observations that you've made in terms of higher education as an object of study, but higher education as an important element in any society?
Yeah, education transformed my life for sure, and it has transformed the lives of those people who are really close to me and surround me, because they've had a different life as a result of my education, and I've never lost sight of that, Judyth, and so I'm very committed to the power of education to change life and to give people choices. I think about, you know, education as giving people choices in life. And I think when I never anticipated being in research intensive universities or privileged institutions such as the ones that I've inhabited, actually in all three countries, so in Leeds and Australia and here. But actually I feel that that's such a privilege and an opportunity, because there's no doubt about it, I've worked hard to get there, right? So let's not pretend that there's a way of getting to this end game without putting all the work in. I've worked hard to get there. So yes, it's a privilege, but I've also earned a place in these seats that I'm sitting in. But what do I do about that? And what I try to do about that, and the way in which I attempt to lead, is to really ensure that people understand the value of education, why it's important to be an open and inclusive environment, why we shouldn't just make judgments about those people that we see and the people that perhaps don't look like the people that would have traditionally been in universities such as this one, and be open to understanding that, you know, universities provide education and a research-led and a critical education for multiple different groups, multiple different stakeholders. And we send signals. We send signals to the environment. We're sending signals all the time to people out there, to business, to industry, to governments, about what we do, who we are, and what we focus on. And so I try to take a stance, which is that, you know, I've never lost sight of where I came from or how far my feet are off the ground. And I think institutions like this need to recognize that, you know, we all look different, and we all bring different things.
So that sense of inclusion that you're talking about seems to be a key driver in terms of how you enact your work, but also how you strategize around your work. What are some of the other elements that you bring to the table as part of the Dawn package?
Yeah,
to put it crudely.
I think I'm such a values-led person that I would find it really difficult to do anything in my work if my values were so compromised. And so, you know, what I bring is a very values-led perspective. And that doesn't mean I'm so rigid about values that I'm not open to learning and understanding how other people's values and beliefs and experiences and different cultures come to the table. But I do think for me, you know, I'm very much committed to doing the right thing rather than doing what we can do. So there's lots of things we can do. But then, you know, the question really for me is it the right thing to do? And I think the other thing I bring to the table relates to the comment I made earlier about knowing our place in the world. So we can influence, and we should be aware of that. But we also need to be aware that we have to also be influenced. And so not getting, you know, so lost in how important we are, and recognizing that as a leader, it's what's best on behalf of the university, the whole community, not me, and what's best on behalf of the nation.
Big challenges. So when you think about, reflect on your experience as a student, and the sorts of challenges that current students are facing, what are the starkest contrasts that you can think about in terms of what's happening now that didn't happen before, and then what you as a leader need to recalibrate some of the thinking around policies and practices?
I mean, there's two or three things there really, that if you look at the World Economic Forum risks for 2024, and if you spent any time dwelling on those, I think students, predominantly young people still, not fully, but students that are predominantly young, you know, would have a range of things before them that would be overwhelming in terms of that they are being called upon to respond to. And yes, of course, it includes sustainability and AI and technologies, and thinking about you know, sort of regionalism and global tensions, and you know, a whole range of things. And I think, you know, one of the things now that is very clear, and the World Economic Forum makes this clear, it's very clear to all of us, is that higher education and education actually is part of the remedy for those societal divisions that we're seeing. So I see students having a very different environment these days. There always were societal divisions, and there always were challenges that we face geopolitically and in terms of, you know, some of the things that we've dealt with in the past around development, whether it was different revolutions to the AI and technological ones we have now. But I think we have to prepare our students for a world that's very different to the one that I studied in. And we're doing that here through a curriculum transformation. We're building a relational curriculum. You know, content and discipline knowledge is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And so having that relational curriculum and preparing our students to be civilized in a future that may appear to be becoming even more uncivilized with AI and technology and all of the things that we're dealing with. So critical thinking, empathy, judgment skills, moral reasoning, you know, all the things, how to use data to inform decisions rather than thinking about that is the decision. You know, I think there's a lot that we have to do as part of the education to prepare students. I think the other thing that's really shifted for students, I mean, I could say something about the cost associated with studying now. I was very fortunate, you know, I did my undergraduate degree part-time, but I was supported financially to do that. And things are very different now, and that puts increased pressure on students. But, you know, rather than spend a lot of time on that, I think we also have to think about the transdisciplinary nature of some of those future problems and the current trends that we're facing. And it's not like students can just pick a career and off they go. We're in a very different environment. So those things are challenging, and we do have to respond to them. We're responding them through the curriculum. We're responding through thinking about how we create a community rather than buying into the civic despair, how we create a community that has a moral focus and reminds ourselves that, we're all about moral courage in doing the right thing, and setting our students off on a course of being able to respond to the complexities of the environment they'll be living and working and playing in, rather than necessarily just thinking about preparing them for a job.
Do you think, given what you said, universities in this reimagining higher education, they have to rethink their purpose?
Mm.
And what would that rethinking be if you were leading a university?
Yeah,
I mean, as you are leading a university.
I think so this university is 140 years old, and many universities are, and there are universities that are much older than that. And when I look at the purpose of the university and think about what it is that we're trying to achieve, not very much has changed in the overall purpose. So back to that, what symbolically are we trying to do versus what are we concretely doing right now? And symbolically, I think we're trying to achieve the same thing as we were 140 years ago. And remember, during that time, we've had world wars, we've had major crises in the world, and the universities endured. So there is something enduring about universities that leaders, I think, need to take account of and recognize we are here in a moment in time in the university, and we're going to have a little bit of influence, but these are enduring institutions with enduring missions. We have to keep articulating the purpose in a contemporary zeitgeist, because the moment in time is different now to what it was 10 years ago. So we keep articulating the purpose. We call it the compelling narrative. Of course, keep articulating the compelling narrative around the purpose and value of universities, but recognize it is actually enduring. It remains the same. We are the bastions of, free speech, of ensuring that we are storying democracy in ways which is befitting a contemporary society, at the same time as we're creating hotbeds of opportunity for conversation, dialogue, learning, education, new knowledge to emerge, new knowledge that has the purpose of changing people's lives, advancing people's opportunities, and really, really driving an agenda around, societal change and transformation. So we do that through multiple ways: education, research, all of those things. We are anchor institutions for our cities and for our nations. We provide stability. 140 years is a very stable environment to consider. And that, I think, people like to feel that we've got solid ground around us. We all know that's a myth. There is no solid ground. Right now, as you and I are talking, we're moving, the earth's, moving. And we get that. There is no solid ground. But in a world where people do need some certainty and want to feel that there's something stable, universities do provide that.
So universities are highly political places. They're places where governments have particular expectations. And in your country, as in mine, and in the UK, there's certainly sites for contestation. How then do you manage this sort of contested notion of purpose and what a university is in your role as a university leader?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two things here that feed into that. The first, which we haven't talked about yet, but is quite important, is we're doing that in an era of misinformation and disinformation that is unprecedented and that is really quite complex to navigate our way through. Because, in a way, when I start to talk about the purpose and putting some evidence behind the value of a university to any system or society, it's very different doing that these days, because we have to try and weave our way through. It's like doing a slalom course or something on a ski slope where, there's a misinformation there, and there's a disinformation there, and there's another, and trying to work through that. And that's complex. So I think we've got to get better at simplifying our message, better at not thinking. Well, first of all, we need to work out whether we are the ones that should be giving the message.
Mhm.
The best advocates for our sector and for our universities. And it's not always the Vice-Chancellor. And what are the sorts of things? How do we talk to our audience? Because I find that academics, and I'm an academic, so I can say this, I find that academics are very good at talking to the audience as if they were us, as if it's ourselves, and we're not the audience. So talking about the purpose to politicians or to government, or to just in terms of trying to work through some of the myths and misinformation, mean that we've got to think about how we create those messages in a way that help people to be able to understand the value add, and how it's going to be, how it can inform their lives, and how it can be seen as an end user outcome for somebody else rather than a self-serving message for ourselves.
So is it creating a disposition of inquiry and learning that is at the centre of your values-led approach to the place of a university?
It certainly is for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that universities aren't always places that give the impression that we're at the center of curiosity driven learning, and that's something that we want to not only espouse but live. And I think that we're not always listening even to politicians with curiosity, but think that we have the answer already. So, maybe my response to what you just said doesn't make sense, but I feel that sometimes we don't listen to understand, we listen to reply.
Absolutely. I think you're right there. And you used one of my favorite words, curiosity. And I think that often in universities, the idea of curiosity is suppressed.
Mm.
It's
Mhm.
about delivering the facts and the right answer.
Yeah. Well, isn't it? I agree, and I feel that sometimes, and I'm as guilty of this as other people as well, because we're always trying to there's a lot of justification that goes on. Instead of listening to reply, actually really being curious about how this belief has come about, which is what the life of the mind is all about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, being curious.
Have to remember to live that.
Yeah. One last question. We're going to go back to us, the students. You come across students every day, and you have a reputation of talking to students and being visible. What advice, given the context in which we're living at the moment, what advice would you give students in terms of self-managing their lives, but also managing the ambiguities of their future?
We'll start with the ambiguities of the future. Learning to tolerate uncertainty and not knowing is probably the greatest skill that you can gain from a university education.
Mm-hmm.
We're not very good at tolerating uncertainty and not knowing. And that is very uncomfortable, even for most of us now. And, it's, not knowing, it's hard to admit and hard to tolerate that uncertainty, but it's a skill really worth cultivating. And I think it helps in then how you manage yourself, because how I manage myself, and I still have a lot of work to do on how to learn how to do this, is reminding myself that I can just wait and not have to jump into everything, and absolutely try and understand what's going to work for me that's not the same it's going to work for everybody else just because everybody else is doing it, and to go at my own pace with this. So, reminding students that there is a plethora of opportunities available, and that is just as problematic as having your choices limited. So it really is important to recognize that you don't have to do everything now. You're creating the foundation so that you can make choices for yourself about what you do when, and when those opportunities come up, to really give some thought to, whether this is the right moment for that.
So are you suggesting then the importance of stepping back, reflecting, and then responding?
Yeah, reflection. And there's so little time for reflection in today's sort of world of work, but also in life in general. And what we see in social media and in the media more broadly, and in the way in which our lives become so overscheduled, is there's very little time to take stock, to reflect, to really listen to lots of the multiple voices that we're hearing inside that get drowned out. And you said curiosity gets drowned out. Well, partly that's also because we've lost the time and capacity to be curious about ourselves, let alone about the world. It's a disposition to start from being curious about myself. Oh, why did I think that? Well, that's a funny thing. Why did that pop up right now? Instead of reacting. And take that disposition into then the world and into our learning environments, so that we actually are curious about other people and about what it is that we're reading and what it is that we're understanding.
Dawn, thank you for a most enjoyable conversation. I hope that you have also enjoyed it as much as me. And I enjoyed the thoughtfulness and the candor of your responses. Given you have a diary rather than a life, and that you're able to give us
That's true.
45 minutes of your time today. So thank you. I've enjoyed it. And I hope, as I suggested at the beginning, you feel a bit lighter having had our conversation.
Thank you. It's great to have an opportunity to reflect and remind myself what's important to me.
Indeed, indeed. And, perhaps this afternoon you'll go out running as well.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.